Ever feel like life is just going 100 miles an hour?
Yeah.
Like trying to stay on top of everything. I think we all felt a bit like that during the pandemic, right? Like everything just changed so fast.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely made me think a lot about, how much control we really have over
Yeah.
anything. And even when things aren't that crazy, there's still that pressure, from work and family and goals, everything pulling us in different directions all the time.
Right, right.
So where do we find that solid ground, that feeling of being centered in the middle of all the chaos? Today, we're diving deep into something you might not expect, a talk called Make Time for the Lord.
Okay.
It was given by President Russell M. Nelson at a gathering for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Interesting.
Now, I know what you might think, what does this have to do with me?
Mm-hmm.
Stick with us, because even if you're not religious, there's some really universal wisdom here that anyone can apply.
I think that's so true. There's so many times that even though I'm coming from a faith-based perspective, I find that the principles are applicable to everyone.
Totally.
Really are, yeah.
Okay, so let's jump in. President Nelson starts out talking about this idea of Babylon's band.
Yeah. What a phrase.
Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, Babylon's banned. So if we think about it, ancient Babylon was known for these extravagant parades and festivals, lots of music and commotion.
Uh-huh.
And President Nelson uses this image to represent the constant noise and distractions of the world today. The news cycle, social media, the pressure to always be on.
Oh, for sure.
It's like you're constantly being bombarded.
Yes.
And it makes it so hard to hear anything else.
Like everyone's yelling at you all the time.
Right.
And you just want some peace and quiet.
Exactly. It makes it hard to hear yourself think,
Yeah. And it's not just the external noise either. Sometimes it feels like my own thoughts are a Babylon's band.
Mm-hmm.
All the worries and the to-do list just swirling around in my head.
Oh, I totally agree. I think we create so much internal noise ourselves sometimes.
Yeah. So President Nelson argues that in all this craziness, it's so important to make time for something deeper, for what he calls spiritual grounding.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't even have to take that in a strictly religious sense.
No.
Think of it as making space for the things that give you a sense of stability, purpose, connection to something bigger than yourself, however you define that.
I think it's so interesting. I love how he focuses on this idea of building a strong foundation.
Yes.
He uses this imagery of making your spiritual foundation, and I'm quoting here, firm and able to stand the test of time. Ooh, I love that metaphor.
Yeah, it's powerful because it really speaks to that need for something solid to hold on to when everything else feels so shaky.
Absolutely. So it's not about being religious. It's about finding that strong inner foundation.
Yes. Whether it's your values, your beliefs, or just your sense of inner peace that helps you weather the storms.
Right. It's about that inner resilience, that ability to bounce back from challenges.
For sure. And the big question is, how do we build that foundation when we're surrounded by Babylon's band 24/7?
Yeah. How do we tune out the noise?
Exactly. He talks about learning to tune in to a different frequency, to what he calls the spirit, that inner voice of wisdom and intuition. And get this, he even says that this voice speaks about things as they really are and will be.
Oh.
Which would be, incredible to have when making decisions, wouldn't it?
Can you imagine to have that kind of clarity?
Yeah.
It would be life-changing.
Seriously, who wouldn't want that? It's like having a superpower.
It's like seeing the future.
Right, to see past all the distractions and know what really matters.
Yeah.
But how do we actually tap into that? Is there a trick?
Well, I think that's where the making time part comes in. President Nelson talks about things like daily prayer, studying the scriptures, and focusing on Jesus Christ as an example.
But even if those specific things aren't for you, the idea is to make space for reflection, for connecting with something larger than yourself, however you define that.
So it's not about adding a bunch of things to our to-do list.
Right.
It's about shifting our mindset and making choices about how we use our time and energy.
It's about being intentional, choosing to focus on things that bring us peace and clarity and a sense of purpose.
Right. He even says we should be careful about how much time we spend on social media.
Oh, yeah.
And that we should be more proactive about seeking out different sources of information.
That's such a good point. Where we get our information really shapes how we see the world.
It really does. And sometimes we don't even realize it.
Absolutely. It's
yeah.
Are we letting ourselves be swept away by whatever everyone else is saying?
Mm.
Or are we really trying to understand things from different angles?
That's a great way to put it. He also talks about this idea of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Which for a lot of faiths is a day of rest.
But he talks about it as more than just taking a break. It's about intentionally disconnecting from the world and reconnecting with something deeper.
I love that. It's like hitting the reset button on your soul.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And even if you don't observe a traditional Sabbath, I think
Yeah.
that idea of disconnecting is so important.
Especially in today's world.
Right. We're always on.
Yeah, we need to give ourselves permission to unplug and recharge.
For sure. To reconnect with ourselves, with loved ones, with nature.
Exactly. To remember what truly matters. And speaking of reconnecting with something bigger, this is where his talk takes a kind of interesting turn.
Right.
He starts talking about temples, which, if you don't know, are these sacred spaces for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he announces all these plans to build a bunch more of them.
Oh, wow. A bunch. Like a lot.
Yeah, a lot. It's a pretty big deal for members of the church. But what's so cool, I think, is that even if you don't have that belief system, you can still relate to the idea, dedicating time and resources to something bigger than yourself.
Right. Like it's not just about you.
Exactly. Think about like the cathedrals in Europe, those old pyramids, even community gardens or volunteer projects.
Yeah.
It's people coming together to make something meaningful, something that connects them to a purpose.
So it's about wanting to be part of something bigger.
Yes, totally. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, that foundation, that sense of belonging and purpose. President Nelson says that doing things that fit with our values, things that give us meaning, can really ground us in a world that feels so chaotic.
It's like you're not just floating around.
Right, exactly. He even says, and this is a direct quote, "The Lord knows you and loves you."
Oh, wow.
And, whatever you believe, that can be really comforting, right?
To feel seen and known like that.
Exactly. To feel loved. It's something everyone needs, no matter what religion. Yeah, totally. And he says it's not something that just happens to us. We have to work for it.
Okay, so what do we do?
It's about making time to think, to listen to that inner voice, to find things that give us peace and a sense of belonging.
So being intentional about it.
Exactly. And he even challenges us to look at where we're getting our information from.
Yeah.
Are we just surrounding ourselves with negativity and fear?
Ooh, that's good.
Or are we looking for truth and inspiration? It's like he's saying, be careful what you feed your mind and your spirit.
I like that.
And that goes for how we use our time, too. He talks about making time for the important stuff, not just on Sundays, but every day.
Right, like it's a way of life.
Exactly. And you can apply that to your own beliefs,
Yeah.
Maybe it's meditating or connecting with nature or spending time with people you love or just being present in the moment.
Yeah.
It's about choosing to focus on the things that feed your soul and bring you closer to who you really are.
It's like he's saying, don't let life drown out your inner voice. Make time for things that connect you to something bigger, something that gives you purpose.
Yes. And in a world that's always trying to grab our attention, that's where we find real peace and happiness.
It's interesting how a message from a religious gathering can mean so much to anyone who's looking for a more meaningful life.
It really is. It shows how much we all need those basic things: connection, purpose, belonging.
Like it's built into us no matter who we are or what we believe.
Exactly. We're all searching for that feeling of being grounded, of being connected to something bigger than ourselves.
So how do we do it?
It's about making choices on purpose, choosing things that match our values and what we want to achieve, and ultimately realizing that we're not just here to survive, but to truly live, to connect, to give back, to experience everything life has to offer.
Sometimes that means ignoring the noise of the world, tuning out the distractions and listening to that quiet voice inside that tells us what we're really capable of.
Yeah, that's a journey.
It's a long one, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. It's a journey of discovering yourself, of growing spiritually, of finding what gives your life meaning and purpose.
And it can lead to a life full of peace and joy and happiness.
I think so.
So we've talked about making time for the Lord, or more broadly, making time for whatever feeds your soul.
Right.
But what does that actually look like? How do we make it work in our busy lives?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And that's what we're going to talk about next. We'll look at some real strategies and steps you can take to make more space for connection, purpose, and meaning in your life.
All right. So we know why it's important, to find time for that connection, for feeding our souls, whatever that means for each of us.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? Like, what does it look like in real life with our crazy schedules?
Well, the good news is there's no right or wrong way, but President Nelson does give some ideas in his talk.
Okay.
He talks about daily prayer as a way to talk to God, to ask for guidance and be thankful. But even if you're not religious, just taking some quiet time. To think and connect with your inner wisdom can be really powerful.
Like hitting pause on all the thoughts and to-dos.
Exactly, just breathing and remembering what's important.
Yes.
He also talks about studying scriptures, which for Latter-day Saints means the Book of Mormon and the Bible.
Okay.
But we can think bigger, like reading anything that's wise and inspiring, philosophy, poetry, biographies of people you admire, anything that speaks to you and makes you think differently.
I've actually been trying that lately. Instead of scrolling on my phone before bed, I've been reading essays about mindfulness.
Oh, nice.
And it's amazing how 10 minutes of that can change my whole mood. I fall asleep feeling peaceful instead of stressed.
That's awesome. It's about finding what works for you, what helps you feel calm and clear in all the craziness.
And President Nelson also mentions focusing on Jesus Christ as a role model, which might not be everyone's thing. But even if you're not Christian, the idea is to find qualities you admire in people. So it could be Jesus or Buddha or Gandhi or even someone you know personally. It's about finding people who live the way you want to live.
Right.
And learning from them.
Exactly. Surrounding yourself with good examples, whether it's in books or art or real people.
Yeah, I love it. It's so much better than just letting the world tell you who to be.
Right. And speaking of being proactive, President Nelson gives some advice that might surprise you.
What's that?
He says to limit our time on social media, which, let's be honest, can suck up so much time and energy.
Oh, yeah.
And he says to be careful about where we get our information, to look for different viewpoints and to check our own biases.
That really hit me because it's so easy to get stuck in echo chambers, especially online. You only see things that you already agree with.
Right.
But looking for different opinions, even ones you don't like, can really open your eyes and help you understand the world better.
It's about thinking for yourself and not just believing everything you hear.
And maybe one of the most powerful things he says is to keep the Sabbath as a real day of rest.
Yeah.
Whether you have a traditional Sabbath or not, the idea is to disconnect from all the demands and reconnect with yourself, with people you love, and with something bigger.
It's like pressing reset on your soul.
I love that, giving ourselves permission to just...
Exactly. He says it's not a chore. It's a gift to ourselves, a time to recharge, to think, to connect with things that bring us joy.
So it's not about doing more. It's about changing how we think about things, choosing to make our well-being a priority.
Right, whether it's through quiet time or nature or being creative or just spending time with loved ones without all the distractions.
And the cool thing is that those little changes can make a big difference in our lives.
They really can. They can strengthen our relationships, make us feel better emotionally, and even help us be more creative and get more done.
It's like investing in ourselves at the deepest level.
Yeah, and in a world that's always asking for our attention. That's a really powerful thing to do.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. If you could really hear that inner voice of wisdom that President Nelson calls the whisper of the spirit, what would you ask it to help guide you?
That's a great question. It makes you think about what's truly important to you, what direction you want your life to go in.
And it reminds us that we all have that inner wisdom, that compass that can help us navigate life.
We just have to make time to listen.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope this has inspired you to think about how you can make more space for meaning and connection in your life.
And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep listening to those inner whispers.